Steve and Courtney filled out a 7-page questionnaire before we started. Not the usual kind that you get, where it's list your rooms, tick some boxes. This one asked how they actually live, the worst time of day in their current home, what they love about where they live now, what they wish they had, what frustrates them every single day that they wish they could change. And the great thing was, they were honest. Their current home was too small. There was no storage. Morning rush is the worst time of day. Getting 3 kids, which are 5, 3, and 6 months, out of the door every weekday morning in a house that has nowhere for anything to land. What did they love? They loved their views and looking out with plenty of windows. What did they wish they had? Somewhere for the kids' books, school bags, sports equipment, somewhere that isn't the floor. There was 2 sentences there that summarized the whole project. A home that is generous enough to hold this family properly, and a home that opens up to the landscape that they chose to live in. Everything in this episode is about the distance between those 2 sentences and the finished buildings. At the end of episode 1, we had the site understood. Survey was complete and the 5 overlays were mapped onto the survey. The planning framework was clear. What I didn't yet have was an honest picture of what the brief was actually asking for, and whether the budget behind it was pointing at the same project. 3 things need to be established before design can start. First, the full brief, which is not just the room list. It's the way the family actually lives, what the home has to fix, and what the design needs to deliver spatially for those fixes to hold. Secondly, it's the full scope, because on a rural property like this one, the brief is not just the dwelling. It's actually the whole site. And the whole site carries costs that most residential projects never have to account for. Every one of those costs have to be named before a single line is drawn. Third, whether the budget was correctly calibrated against the full scope. An indication formed around a house figure is a different number from an indication that carries the full rural development this project requires. The gap between those 2 numbers, if it exists, is better found out now than at tender. The 30-page information gathering and project clarity report, which we know as feasibility, has been delivered and was accepted before the fee was signed. This is what established all 3. Now that we have the fee proposal signed, we're going to go through the brief right before we start concept design, which is due to begin next week. The brief came from 3 sources read together and combined. The client questionnaire, 7 pages, filled in before engagement. Not a room list. It was how they move through a home on a weekday morning, how they use it on the weekend, what they love about where they live, what fails them every day, and what they wish they had but didn't. That questionnaire is the design instruction underneath the room list. Then we had the feasibility report, 30 pages covering every planning control, every site constraint, the full scope mapped honestly, the consultant sequence, and the budget conversation. Every overlay read from the actual Yarra Ranges planning scheme, not summarised from memory. Every mandatory infrastructure requirement under GWZ1, which is the base zone known as Green Wedge Zone, was documented and costed as a separate line item. And the conversation with Jared at Cobalt Construction, who has been on this project from the start. Remember, at this point in time, he's not contracted to build. We don't lock it in that early. And that decision stays with Steve and Courtney throughout. But reading the brief against what this site and this scope will actually cost to build in the Dandenong Ranges. And Cobalt's knowledge of rural construction cost at this location is genuine and specific. It's not an estimate from a floor plan, but a read from someone who builds in this area. That knowledge is part of how the scope conversation happens honestly. And it's something that needs to happen at concept design before anything is drawn. And before you're locked in and that you love something that you can't afford once it's already been completed. This is the brief as received. The room list, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms that include an ensuite, a main bathroom, and a separate toilet. Open plan kitchen and living with a butler's pantry, and a built-in double fridge. Separate TV room, kids zone, physically separated from the parents' wing. A kids' playroom that also serves as a spare bedroom. Triple garage with internal house access. Gym, sauna, bar. Covered outdoor living, super important because it needs to be sized generously. because they currently use their outdoor area all year round and want that to continue regardless of the weather. Laundry with a full drying cupboard. Study alcoves off the kids' rooms, but not as a dedicated office because no one works from home here. It's just homework and drop zones that are located where the kids can actually live rather than a separate room no one will use. 3 cars and a buggy. On its own, that is a large but entirely manageable brief for a 10.8 hectare rural property. It is a serious home for a family who knows and has thought carefully about how they want to live. But the questionnaire gave me something more useful than the room list: how the family actually uses the home. Weekday mornings are the clearest picture. Washing, breakfast, school bags, getting a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old ready while someone is still feeding the baby. The house they are in now fails them at this point every single day because there is nowhere for any of it to land. School bags end up on the kitchen bench. Sports equipment ends up on the living room floor. The morning routine is a daily negotiation with a home that was not designed for how they live. So the new home does not just need to have rooms. It needs to have a sequence. A place where the school morning arrives and gets absorbed. Bags, shoes, lunchboxes. That is not the kitchen bench. The mudroom has to genuinely work. The study alcoves off the kids' rooms are not an afterthought. They are where the school gear lives, so common spaces can actually just be common. And then we move into weekends that are completely different. Quiet starts the morning, then it opens up. Small dinners, people over in the afternoon. They use their outdoor space all year round. The covered alfresco is not just a nice to have. It is the space where this family uses their weekend life. The design vision that they've given me: warm, light, open. They want to walk in and feel it immediately. All day brightness, skylights, indoor plants, tall ceilings that vary across the spaces. Generous where family gathers and we entertain, but more intimate where we want to retreat. The indoor-outdoor connection needs to be real. So that means plenty of windows, views out to the landscape that they chose to live in. The sense of actually being in the property, not just living in it. That's what good design does. When looking at the exterior materials, timber, concrete, stone, dark and warm, nothing white or pale. We discussed it in the previous episode, but the red soil on this site rules out light exteriors visually and practically. And also the SL05, which is the significant landscape overlay we covered in episode 1, also reinforces that. Their instinct and the planning requirements are actually pointing in the same direction. Then the questionnaire moved past the house. Outbuildings, which included farm sheds, machinery sheds, workshops, storage, a dam for agriculture and irrigation through the week, and part of the landscape they look at on the weekend. And finally, the pool. And the staging answer. They want to look at doing the dam first and then everything else at once. That is the moment the brief stops being a house brief. It becomes more than a house brief, it becomes a rural development. And this distinction matters because the budget has to carry the whole thing, not just the dwelling. The dwelling and everything inside it, the farm structures, and the number of buildings that actually proceed as separate outbuildings depends on the planning assessment. As we discussed in the previous episode, EMO 3, which is the landslip overlay with that expiry of 7th of October 2027, exempts agricultural buildings from permit requirements, but only exempts up to 2 of them per lot. That 2 limit building is a direct consequence of an overlay for this brief, and it was found early. So when we look at those outbuildings, we see that the farm and machinery shed and the workshop are the 2 most clearly agricultural in function. They are the ones that the permit strategy can be built around because they're exempt. But the implementation shed and storage shed need to be assessed against the planning system and what it will actually support before they're designed and costed. This is what pre-design does. It works out what we need to do before we move forward. And then we have the mandatory site infrastructure under the Green Wedge Zone, which is GWZ1, which we did also cover in episode 1. It requires an all-weather emergency access road suitable for emergency vehicles. It requires a full alternate wastewater treatment system. As mentioned, there's no reticulated sewer connection in Silvan, so this is a full civil engineering item with its own field location that has to be confirmed in the concept design and is a part of the concept layout. We need potable water supply with firefighting storage, and we also need to factor in electrical connection and also electrical storage. All of those are fixed costs that exist before the house construction begins. They're not extras. The Green Wedge Zone mandates them as a condition of the dwelling permit. The driveway on a sloped rural block of this scale is not a standard suburban driveway, and it's important to know that. The north-northwest fall that makes this site so compelling from a view and solar standpoint is the same fall that makes the driveway a significant civil works item. Every metre of elevation change on a rural access road built to emergency vehicle standard adds to the earthworks, the compaction, the drainage, and the surface treatment required. The driveway is its own item and it needs to be factored in when we cost this. The bell rating, which is currently unknown until the bushfire consultant assesses the siting based on where we locate our concept. But this has a direct effect on the construction cost of the dwelling. We covered the bell range in episode 1. It's bell 12.5 through to bell 40 on a property like this. On a large footprint home with 2 wings and the extensive north-facing glazing this brief requires, the difference between a low bell rating and a high one runs into the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars across the building envelope. That range sits over the dwelling budget until the consultant confirms the number. But we take an approach where we meet in the middle ground. So currently we're going to design to bell 29, which sits in the middle as a working assumption until it does. So the glazing specification gets resolved once, not redesigned when the rating arrives. And then the dam. A properly constructed agricultural dam is not a paddock excavation. It involves earthworks engineered to a civil standard, compaction to prevent seepage, and overflow spillway size correctly for the catchment. And the Water Act 1989 requires a license from Southern Rural Water, which is a separate government process with its own lead time running completely independently of the planning permit and the concept design. As mentioned, Steve's answer in relation to staging. Do the dam first. So that means the license process has to begin immediately. So we are looking at to engage Southern Rural Water to initiate this license. What the full scope meant, mapped against the budget indication, is straightforward. The budget indication was formed around a house. The project is not a house. The gap between these two things, it's not a crisis, it's a design conversation. But it's a conversation that has to happen at concept design. With Cobalt in the room and every component as a separate line item, not after design is finalized and the family is attached to it. Budget is a design input. It's not a constraint to fight once the design is loved, because that becomes a very tedious and upsetting process for the clients. Steve and Courtney arrived at their indication through estimation, not through a builder who has walked this site, understood the slope and priced the scope. That's completely normal though. Most clients arrive at the first conversation with a number that seems right. The pre-design stage does not accept that number uncritically. It maps the full scope, the dwelling, the farm structures, the dam, all-weather driveway, wastewater system, water storage, bell compliant construction on a large glazed home, geotechnical requirements, civil works on a sloped rural block in the Dandenong Ranges foothill, against what each of those components will actually to build here. Then it names the gaps and the decisions that close them. That is a conversation that is worth having before the design starts. The same conversation forced at tender is a result after the design is approved, and the clients have 3 months of attachment to a design that is not within their budget, and that is an uncomfortable conversation. And unfortunately, it's a redesign conversation. And on a project with an EMO deadline of the 7th October next year, a redesign conversation costs time this project does not have to spare. The finding on the consultant sequence was similarly specific. But before I go into that, it's important to say that the budget that we form early is a developing brief, and we talk about this with our clients very well. We will work to the number, but we also need to understand that we need to have an open process between what you want to achieve and what it costs. We normally recommend that you design absolutely everything that you want in the home, you get your initial budget, and then you pull back based on that. That makes sure that we're working to a figure that we have extensively pushed and massaged. And it gets the most out of the project so that you're not sitting there saying, I wish we had done this. It does take a little bit longer, but we have found that it's the most effective way to get you everything that you want for the budget that you want to spend. And it keeps everything honest from our end and at your end, that you know where the money's going and why it's being spent this way. And it's way every design should work. Everything should be open and honest so you understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's where we're a little bit different, but we find that works really well. So the 5 overlays on this site collectively require 8 consultant engagements before the project reaches council. The question was not just who, it was actually when. Because consultants who run the wrong order create redesigns. And the sequence on this project is not arbitrary. So the bushfire consultant cannot assess the bell without knowing where the dwelling is proposed. The arborist cannot assess native vegetation clearing without understanding where the building footprint and the driveway align. The wastewater engineer cannot locate the treatment field without a site plan. And the treatment field has to be confirmed before the concept layout is finalised, because on a sloped rural site, the field location constrains where the house can go. Get it wrong and the waste field ends up in the only viable position for the building. That has happened on projects where the wastewater engineer was engaged after the concept was approved. The geotechnical assessment is mandatory under EMO 3 and has to accompany the planning application, which means it needs to be hand in hand before lodgement, not commissioned after. Every one of those timing decisions has a consequence if it is wrong. Every one of them is free if you get it at the right stage. The response to the scope and the budget finding was to structure the concept design stage around a full scope conversation with Cobalt from week 1, and we recommend this on all projects. Not a dwelling budget reviewed at the end of the concept, a line-by-line conversation. Dwelling, farm structures, dam, driveway, services, pool, site works, running alongside the design as it develops, not after it's finished. So that every decision Steve and Courtney make about what the house includes is made with a clear understanding of what it costs and what it competes with in the budget. Jared from Cobalt brings genuine cost intelligence at this stage. He understands rural construction rates at this location because he's done it before. And he has a specific view on what the slope adds to civil works. And the discipline to separate scope into components so that numbers are honest and comparable. So we're a little bit different with how we work with builders. We bring them on early, and we think that's super important because it adds buildability, efficiency, and costing early. So you don't get to design that you love and it's approved and you realize you can't afford it. That's not fair on you. It's really about giving you the information up front. And we structure it in a way with Cobalt where it's a little bit different because we don't want Cobalt to do this for free. We don't, with all the effort that they put in and help us and to get the numbers that you're looking for, we believe that they should be paid for their time. So Acasny pays a modest engagement fee for Jared's time at concept and through the design. But we don't lock Cobalt in if you don't want to. If Steve and Courtney choose Cobalt at construction, awesome. If they choose a different builder, again, Cobalt has been fairly compensated for their time. It's making sure that we don't bring in people who put in a lot of effort and aren't compensated. The choice stays with the clients though, if they want to proceed with Cobalt or if they want to engage their own builder. We just find that the costing early matters and we want to bring in builders that we trust to do this. So the response to the consultant sequence was to confirm the timing logic in the report and initiate the engagements. And we wanted to do this immediately. So bushfire consultants and arborists briefed this week, running concurrently with the starter concept design, because their findings feed directly back into the layout as it develops. Wastewater engineer engaged now, because the field location needs to be confirmed before the concept is finalised. We need a geotechnical engineer briefed before planning permit is lodged. And we need to speak to Southern Rural Water already because we need to get that license request in. The response to the permit strategy was a single complete application. And it doesn't mean they have to build everything now, but everything gets costed, the dwelling, the farm structures, the dam, all in one submission. Because one application costs one fee, and it makes sure that all of them are cited not only within relation to each other, but the 5 overlays means multiple referral authorities. So the CFA gets brought in for the BMO, Southern Rural Water and potentially Melbourne Water for the dam and waterway setback, the council's ecology team for ESO 1. So a fragmented approach where we do different items at different stages and separate permits for separate elements means multiple referral queues and multiple opportunities for one application to hold up another. We believe that one well-prepared application with all consultant reports, all design, complete before lodgement avoids all of that. It not only saves weeks and potentially months, but it can save thousands of dollars. But again, the different thing is that you don't have to build all these at once. You have a full holistic view on what it costs and you can stage these. So stage 1 might be the house. Stage 2 might be the pool. Stage 3 might be the shed. You might want to look at doing the pool and the dam first. You might want to do the house and the dam first. It gives you flexibility. You're not being locked into building everything at once. It allows you to make a decision. And again, with everything else that we're putting into this episode in our process, it's giving you as much information that you can make an informed decision based on what is best for you. But we've also got to consider that on a project with a fixed program, working towards that EMO deadline of the 7th of October, that saving is not cosmetic, it's important. What the feasibility produced is a project that is properly ready to design. Not designed, ready to design. Every major constraint has been named before the first scheme is drawn. The Bell uncertainty is a working assumption of Bell 29, designed into the brief from the start so the glazing specification gets resolved once. The waterway field location is being confirmed. The dam license will start moving. The cottage resolution is a council conversation that we're going to already start. The consulting sequence is locked. The permit strategy is set, and the brief is now honest. Not the brief as first received, which is a house with a room list, the brief as it actually is. A rural development with a dwelling at its centre. A family of 5 who know exactly how they want to live in it. And a scope that has to be tested against a budget as a separate line item before anything is locked. And a planning framework that has a fixed deadline, 18 months away. That is what Steve and Courtney signed the fee proposal on. Not drawings, but an understanding of the process. The project they are actually building properly understood before anyone picked up a pencil. So the free upgrade principle at pre-design is not about orientation or eave depth. It's about information. Every constraint found here costs nothing to respond to early. The same constraints found after the design is complete and approved and the family is already attached to it cost redesign time, consultant variations, and in the worst case, a planning application pulled for an amendment. There is a version of this project that started in week 1 with a house brief and a budget indication and no feasibility stage, where the scope expanded during the design as the rural reality of the site became clear, where the dam license wasn't initiated until someone raised it at a pre-application meeting, where the budget conversation happened after the concept approval. That version exists. It's how a significant number of rural residential projects proceed. That is not this version. So what's next, you might ask? Well, the first scheme, episode 3. Concept design begins this week. We have the survey, the overlays are mapped. Consultants are going to be engaged this week. We have the full scope documented. The budget conversation with Cobalt is underway against real line items. And Steve and Courtney understand that this is going to be an open conversation through concept design. We start placing a building on this site for the very first time. Testing orientation against the slope. Testing the U or H building form Cobalt proposed. 2 wings, a central connection. The alfresco embedded in the form, against what the brief actually requires spatially. Understanding the north-northwest at 240 meters elevation in the Dandenong Ranges foothills mean for how this building performs across a full year. Silvan delivers sub-zero mornings and summers that push past 40 degrees. That building has to manage both directions. The brief Steve and Courtney wrote, warm, light, open, all-day brightness, genuine indoor-outdoor connection, usable all year, is a thermal and orientation brief. Those words describe a building orientated correctly to the sun, glazing placed deliberately, eaves at the depth that this latitude requires. That cost nothing extra at concept, but it left unresolved. Unfortunately, it cost every year the family lives there in heating and cooling bills, running against a building envelope that was not designed for this climate. And the views they want, out to the bush-covered ridge to the north-northwest, and the orientation the client demands are pointing in the same direction. That's free to use. The view and the sun are the same decision. That is not always the case, but on this side it is, and that'll be episode 3. The 2 sentences Steve and Courtney wrote on the questionnaire stay with me from this stage. What they love about where they live now, the views and looking out, plenty of windows. What frustrates them every day, the house is too small with no storage. Those are not a brief. They're actually alive. A family trying to live well in a house that makes it harder than it should be. And a property they chose because of what it opens to. The landscape, the ridge, the sky. Everything in this episode, the scope work, the budget conversation, the consultant sequence, the permit strategy, the 30-page report. This is different to how other designers work, but it exists to protect the distance between where they are now and where those 2 sentences are trying to get to. When their youngest is old enough to leave their school bag in the drop zone that they asked for, and Steve is standing in the kitchen looking at the ridge they fell in love with, that outcome was protected right here, before a line was drawn, before the design gets started, at the stage where it costs nothing to get right. We're very excited to see you at concept.